9 iron for him. They're going to go nuts when he hits this thing.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Yo, yo, yo. Welcome in, golf fans. My name is Joe Idoni. At Tour Picks is the place to find me on X, and you have stumbled upon the Preferred Lines Betting Podcast. I'm here to bring you an entire show tonight. Good evening, Ted. I'm happy that you sort of brought this up. We're definitely going to get into it. Joanne as well. Thank you all for joining us. My boy Joe. What's up, brother? Yo, yo, yo. Let's get it going. We've got a little recap of Colonial. We're going to dig into, obviously, some of the storylines going on in a emotional week in professional golf, and then shift gears, talk a little bit of course preview, what to expect from Hamilton Golf and Country Club for the RBC Canadian Open this week, moving back to Hamilton since 2019. So excited to get some perspective from our guests, who I'll bring on in just a minute. But got to mention that this show is brought to you in part primarily from the good people over at Rotoballer Sports. The Rotoballer PGA team is off and running. We already have pieces of content up this week. I've released my top 10 power rankings and players to watch for the Canadian Open already. The course preview piece will be out tomorrow. Market Movers, of course, Wednesday. All of my content is okay. All the other people that contribute to the great team at Rotoballer are fantastic, and it is worth every dollar that you will spend. Lines, LINES, is the promo code that you're going to want to use. That'll get you 10% off any premium, monthly, weekly, whatever subscription floats your boat. I can promise you that you will not be disappointed. We have an extremely hardworking team over there. Okay, let's bring the guest on to the show. I'm super excited. It's honestly been a long time coming. I've wanted this person's perspective. I feel like we have very similar thought processes and a lot of things in different stages of life that we're in. The founder of Sia Nejad Sports. He's a qualified legal analyst, which I think could sort of provide some insight that'll be careful in terms of what's going on today. Speaks very fluently in terms of mental health and emotional, motivational awareness and being a mentor to many people, which I greatly respect. He's appeared on VSiN. He's appeared on The First Cut. Now he's doing Sportsline, Early Edge, By the Book. Welcome into Preferred Lines. Good evening, Sia Nejad. Welcome to the show.
Joe, can you do all my intros? Because that was amazing. I really appreciate the thoughts. I'm excited to be on this show. I honestly think this is one of the best shows out there. And there's a lot out there, but like you do. And so I'm into the technical stuff too, not just on the golf side, but like what you have with your studio and your lighting and your camera, your presentation, the manner in which you approach talking on your show. I love all of it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate those kind words. There is a ton of work that goes into it, as you know, in sort of producing these things, writing out a little bit of a script, just making sure that you're organized each and every week in the grind that is the professional golf season. But let's start here, Sia. Let's talk about our winner at the Colonial this past week. We'll start on more of a lighthearted topic. Davis Riley, kind of a reminder to me that these let's call them tier 3, mid-level PGA Tour players ranked number 50 to 75 in the world can still take down Goliath if they're there on Sunday with him. And he's got to bring his A game each and every week if he wants to win. And his B+ game is usually good enough for like second, like it always is. But Davis Riley, a win. The superheroes still have to bring it. And it's sort of a reminder of how good these guys are. And you have to do it all 4 days, right?
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I was stunned that Davis Riley was able to do it all 4 days. So much so that like on day 4, I mean, I had, just so you know, I had 4 outrights. 2 of them were realistic, 2 were not, but they were all in the without Scottie Scheffler market. That's how I decided to attach it. I had Straka, I had Aaron Rye, and then my long shots were Berger and Doug Gim. With that said, I threw in a 5th bet on Sunday early morning because I was like, I may as well take Scottie at, what was it, plus 125, I think, because I'm like, it's a 4-shot lead. I understand that's a huge lead, but all it's going to take is in the first few holes, Davis Riley to have one just little hiccup, like just a single bogey, and Scottie Scheffler to birdie something, and then all of a sudden it's a 2-shot lead. You got 16 or 15 holes to play. the way Davis Riley attacked that, and by the way, one thing I tweeted out earlier, I guess it was after the Friday round, Davis Riley had said he was being interviewed on Sirius XM PGA Tour radio. And he's like, yeah, I was shaking off some nagging injuries this entire year and I'm finally over it. And I was like, gosh, that's interesting information that I kind of wish I would have known. And for the record, I wouldn't have necessarily bet on Davis Riley, but I guess it does kind of explain, him playing so well over 4 rounds. But just my initial point that I wanted to make, and I just did a long-winded way of saying it, I did not think Davis Riley or a caliber player like Davis Riley would hold up under that pressure with Scottie Scheffler right behind him. And he did.
Yeah.
Congratulations to him.
He never really got to the point where he really sort of put the vice grips on him on Sunday. I mean, being right there with him, you have to give him all the credit in the world, was amazing to me. On Saturday, I think pre-round on Saturday, he was either 6 or 7 back of Riley and still the favorite to win that tournament, which I don't know that I've ever seen. I wasn't covering golf to this degree during the Tiger era, and I'm still not willing to put him in that classification because he needs the majors. He needs the totality of wins. But this run is epic. I mean, I was looking at some stuff last week from the last 36 rounds, and he's 72 strokes better than second in the field last week, which was the same gap from second to 116th. Like, it's just like he's almost playing a different game. Do you have expectations that he's going to potentially win one of these next 2 majors, do you think?
Scottie? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I guess I would. I mean, it's so different the way we attack things, right? Because I'm always thinking from a betting standpoint, do I want to take Scottie at the next major at the US Open at plus 350? Like, the answer is no, but I'm not going to criticize anybody who does it, but he's plus 350 for a reason. And frankly, when I went down the board and I looked at the odds for the US Open, which is the next one up, I'm like, well, which one of these guys would I even consider taking like a little bit down the board? Because I'm not even looking at like the 50, 60 to 1 range. I'm looking at like 20 to 1, 16 to 1. And I saw Bryson, I saw Brooks. There were a couple of other players that I saw that I'd be like, yeah, I'd consider that. But yeah, I mean, do I expect him to win? Hard to say that, but should he be a plus 350 favorite? Yeah, kind of.
From a betting side in these majors, do you feel like that I felt like last year we were definitely getting value on the live players, and I was willing to take that on. And I thought like Brooks was a great number at the PGA. I thought Bryson, I had him. I had Cam Smith, and I'm going down my card, and all of a sudden I've got 4 or 5 live guys on my card, and I'm like, it was not intentional, but I feel like we're still getting the value based on what I believe their winning equity is. Do you think that that's starting to go away, or that's still something you see in the majors?
I think it's starting to go away only because there's only a few, and you named them, that I think are viable. And now that, like, we saw Bryson's odds, like I wasn't on Bryson at the PGA Championship, but we saw those odds. I don't even know what they opened at. It might have been, and I'm talking like a week before, not like 2 months before, but like 35 to 1. And then all of a sudden it was 30 to 1 and then 28 to 1. And it got to a point where like the market was telling you, or telling the sports books, like, hey, that there's a few guys that can contend here. And Bryson's one of them. Brooks is one of them. Neiman and Cam Smith got a little bit of attention perhaps, but I think as it pertains to the core group of live players that can actually compete at a major, unfortunately, I think those odds are now adjusted properly.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I especially think moving forward now, once you saw what Bryson did, and obviously Brooks winning a major, Cam, I think you've got to sort of, Neiman's probably in the mix there as well. But yeah, I wanted to ask you also about a little bit of Colonial in the course. Now, I don't think visually it looked ready, but I think it's what you can expect on a 10-month renovation, that there's going to be areas of fresh sod down and stuff like that. But that course's ability to really play difficult, particularly on Sunday. What do you think it is? Because it's not overly long. What was it? The firmness of the greens? Was it the rough? What do you think it is that really challenges PGA Tour players in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were having a hard time judging the wind for one, and I on Sunday, I like that's, and I wasn't sure, like I don't even know that this is the answer, but it just seemed to me like that was wreaking havoc for them. But I do think the firmness, as it sort of graduated from Thursday to Friday to Saturday and so on, I think that was becoming a huge problem for them. But to be honest, I was shocked by how high the scores were on Sunday, how bad the scores were on Sunday, and when I was sort of handicapping what my round matchups were going to be for round 4. Like, I just didn't anticipate that type of carnage. And I lost like the 2 round. I pushed one of them, but the other one I lost. And it was, can't remember who it was right now, but I basically looked at that round. And honestly, when I look at the tournament we're going to talk about, the RBC Canadian Open, I'm almost taking round 4 out of it, because I just thought, I don't want to say it was an outlier, but I just thought there was so much carnage that, like, I looked at some things that were just like, if I'm going to look at last week's tournament, which I do think is a good tournament to look at potentially, I think rounds 1 through 3 kind of tell a more illustrative story of what we should be paying attention to rather than round 4, personally.
Yeah, I mean, the greens were firm. They were new, so of course you're going to get that firmness to them. And the rough, it's interesting because maybe it's the style of grass. Maybe it was the Bermuda of the rough, because I know from playing down here, and you just moved out of Florida, but if you played me golf, the Bermuda is so unpredictable that it seemed like anytime someone was in that, while it didn't look long, it wasn't like you were getting a Valhalla or an Oak Hill type lie where they're zooming in and you can barely see the ball. But it was effective in that you basically had to hit the front of the green or even run it up there and bounce it up whenever you were in the rough. And you had really no chance of flying it all the way mid-green and stopping it. So I think it was the combination of the firmness and just the Bermuda rough, just playing tricks on these guys. Then you throw in the wind, and all of a sudden you get really difficult scores, which makes it really impressive that Davis Riley, in those tough conditions, it was not a scoring fest, was able to sort of withstand them, hold on, and actually increase the gap in his lead as the day went on.
That's the thing. I was waiting for him to crumble, not because he's Davis Riley, although that was part of it. It was because everybody else, other than like Keegan Bradley and, Sepp Straka and Colin Morikawa, those are the only, like, there's a lot of people on that course, and they like all did poorly with the exception of like a handful. It just so happens the guy that everybody thought was going to come back to the field, Davis Riley, was one of those special people that was like, yeah, this is no big deal to me. I'm just going to play 18 like it was yesterday. And it wasn't yesterday. It was today. And today was really hard.
It was a great performance by Davis Riley. I wanted to ask you and shift gears because of your experience and your history sort of in the legal space. And this is probably a question you've gotten a ton over the last week. Where do things go from here with Scottie Scheffler? The video was released. It seems like common sense should prevail. And I don't know that that's always the case in courtrooms as far as my understanding goes, but it seems like common sense is there's nothing there and the charges should be dropped. But the city seems adamant on moving forward with this. Do you think pressure from the media and the outside world and the sports centers and everyone talking about how ridiculous this is has an effect on them, or are they so in their inner circle that they really think they have a case against this guy?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I definitely think they're in their inner circle. And for the record, like, I've been pretty outspoken on this over the last week on different sort of shows, but it's not like any of those guys are paying attention, guys or girls are paying attention to me, right? Or anybody on Twitter. But I do think listen, once the video was released and it was like, we kind of all knew the video wasn't going to show anything. I certainly did, because like, don't forget, he was released immediately after being jailed and booked. Like, if this was really some sort of felonious type situation, you don't just like release him right away, or you don't release him on his own recognizance without bond or bail or things like that. So it seemed pretty clear to me that this was much ado about nothing, which led me to think this is going to be dropped right away. But I think the answer to your question is they are going to get some pressure. I mean, this is kind of ridiculous, but the other side of that is they're clearly dug in to some degree. Like, they didn't drop the charges right away. The district attorney, or whatever they call the attorney in Kentucky, I don't know if it's DA or something else, the prosecutor was like clearly dug in and on that motion to continue, that like it was an argument that he shouldn't have been making. Like, just, it was absurd. So I don't know what's going on with that. I think there's two things working here. I do think if I'm Scottie Scheffler's attorney, I'm telling him, you have literally nothing to worry about. You have absolutely nothing to worry about. This is just a matter of time. Your worst case scenario is paying a like $60 or $100 fine because you didn't follow traffic signals correctly. That's your worst case scenario outcome. And I think everybody kind of knows that, which makes this all the more baffling. But yeah, I think when you get to some towns and some cities and some states, like, you do have that sort of insulation where they're just kind of hearing each other. And that's what's so discouraging. When I practiced law for 13 years, I saw a lot of that. I didn't see it every day, but I saw a lot of that. And it's really kind of discouraging just from a global, like, professionalism standpoint. But here we are. But like, there's that video this should have been the exclamation point that like, we
Correct.
need to not proceed here.
And the fact that we're going through that video too, like, I know that they're all wearing cameras, and it's not even, obviously this officer is the reason this is happening, but there were 4 or 5 other officers around there. And the fact that none of them, it's baffling to me that you show up to a crime scene where someone had, fatally passed away. And there's obviously a whole lot of commotion going on, and not a single one of you who are required to do so, by my knowledge, turn on your camera during those circumstances. And what could the harm possibly be? And what's the point of avoiding it? And it just makes me think that they were, maybe this guy was potentially out to get him. And it's just a bad scene that we're looking through the video through a light post over there, and it still shows nothing, but they're seeming to move forward with them, which makes me think maybe they have something, but I just can't see it. And it seems like it's all just going to end up getting washed away.
Yeah. That's what's going to happen ultimately.
Yeah. Overzealous security guards in the news this week with the Canadian Open. Last year, we had a guy tackle Adam Hadwin at this very event. So big week for people working security and getting a little too big for their britches. All right, so let's move on to the tragic news, a little bit of Grayson Murray. I just kind of want your thoughts on it, Sia, and how it made you feel. It made me incredibly sad. It reminded me that we're all living in the moment and by the day, and nothing is promised or guaranteed tomorrow, and no amount of success exteriorly can help you sort of battle some of the demons. Like, he was having a career year. He had just finished top 10 at the Wells Fargo. He's ahead on the PGA Tour money list. He's in front of Jordan Spieth. He's in front of Victor Hovland. He's made more money than Tony Finau this year. And none of that ultimately mattered. And it just makes me incredibly sad. And I think kind of shines a light on the epidemic that people are going through, whether it's mental health or addiction, but everyone out there is going through something difficult. And it's a reminder to just sort of have compassion and gratitude for the present.
Yeah. And, I think, first of all, I was really sad too. And I reflected, I was like, didn't he win earlier this year? Like, and I just remember like seeing him on leaderboards in 2024 being like, in the back of my mind, I remember thinking like, I thought Grayson Murray wasn't any good at golf. Like he's like playing really well. And I remember like, just to be really like kind of flippant about it because of what we do, I was like thinking about rostering him in DFS. Like that's how good, like in my mind, that's like this guy's playing really well. But I think when I internalized it the way everybody else did, but I think like coming away from it, I'm trying to figure out, because, Joe, you do this too. You talk about mental health and I've really started to do that, do a Twitter space. I've created my own Discord, which is strictly, and some of these people in the chat are in the Discord, by the way, that come in there and we talk mental health and we talk goals and things of that nature, trying to level up and that kind of thing. But I think it's just more of like, well, how do we take this and how do we use it as a positive for people who might be in a similar position? And so I'm still trying to think that through, Joe. I'm still trying to think of like, all right, this is clearly sad. We should clearly be mourning it, but how do we apply this experience to help other people? And Joe, that's something you and I like because of what we've done in the past with mental health, like we'd want to do. And so,
yeah,
I think to myself, okay, let's acknowledge that everybody's fragile. Everybody, not just a golfer who's battling addiction, not just a guy who's open about his fragility because he's, seeking counseling. I think we all need to acknowledge that everybody's fragile. And so if we can do that, then we have to ask ourselves, all right, well, if we're all fragile, like, what do we do? Like, what do you do with something fragile? You handle it with care, right? And well, what does that actually mean? What does handling it with care mean when it comes to me or you or anybody else that may or may not be struggling? What are the outlets that you can have, whether it's family or friends or exercise or positivity, whether it's reading it or watching it on YouTube or getting life coaching from somebody or seeing a therapist? Like, I think we all need to kind of figure out how we can level up, like internally with respect to our mental health. I think we need to write that stuff down. And I think we need to like check boxes in terms of like, hey, what am I actually doing for my mental health? And mental health gets a kind of a stigma to it. What am I doing to stay positive? You can apply any term to that, to the mental health term that's synonymous with it. But I think those are the types of things that if we acknowledge that we're all fragile and that we take the ego out of it, then I think we'll all like take the practical steps to be like, all right, well, how do I make sure I don't put myself in this type of position that can kind of spiral out of control?
Yeah. And I think, I went back, and I don't ever really listen to my podcast, but I went back and listened to a show that I did with Andy Lack on Inside Golf right after Grayson won. And we talked for maybe 20 minutes on it. And, he's battled some stuff. I've been through it as well. I've been pretty open about some struggles that I've gone through in my life. And I just never wanted to judge someone on their worst moment, which we all know, previously with his talks on Twitter, and like he had been through some really rough times when he was battling addiction, or his best moment, which was obviously his win. And it was about more than that for him. It was about him being able to overcome this addiction and disease and this story of redemption, which I can get behind with almost anyone. And you said it best. It reminds me how fragile each and every one of us are. We're all dealing with something in our own way. And I'm by no means any sort of expert on it. I'm just open about it, and I'm trying to be vulnerable about it because I battle with stuff too. And everyone, and we're so glued, like we're looking down and we're viewing the world now through screens and through phones and through Facebook, and we're seeing people's best moments, right? We're seeing the great time that they had on the boat on Memorial Day, right? Of the pictures that they posted with their friends. But we're not seeing what's going on. We're not looking up at the people around us and with some sort of compassion that each one of those people could be going through something, whether it's addiction, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's all these things that can really be mentally crippling. And they're dealing with that all inside of each person. So I try to connect with people in that way. And I know that you do as well. And I've had several people, you mentioned some of the people in the chat, just the DMs with people, and little things that you say may have helped them here or there. And that's what really moves it forward for me. And I really took note to some of the people in my life that I know are battling alcoholism or addiction. It was really a reminder to check in. My mom's one of those people. My mom's like 14 months sober right now. And I called her almost immediately, and she doesn't know who Grayson Murray is. She wouldn't know how to look up this podcast, to be honest. But I just wanted, how are you? How are you doing? Because I saw her a week ago and she was doing great, but that was a week ago. And maybe Grayson Murray, by all accounts, was doing well a week ago. He top 10'd at the Wells Fargo 3 weeks ago. He couldn't have been, but it takes one horrible day. And you mentioned the fragility of life, and it's just one singular moment that can bring it all crippling down and remind everyone around you that just look out for people, man. Especially people they're going through something. It was just a reminder to me to reach out and say, hey, how are you? Is everything okay? Like, you need to talk.
Right. Yeah, I think check-ins in general are really important, and whether it's with mental health or otherwise. And sometimes it's important for your own mental health just to remind yourself that you have friends around you that maybe you're just too busy to acknowledge that they're there or that they exist. Because you reach out to somebody, you get the feedback from that person. You're doing it to help them, but it turns out once the transaction is complete, if you will, that like maybe they're helping you at the same time. So I'm all about texting is so easy. Like, I'm all about like checking in with somebody. It could be the simplest. Could be a 2 or 3 word check-in. It's so simple. I think sometimes I don't do this enough, but I'll take like 20 minutes and I'll be like, oh, I'm just dedicating this 20 minutes to like checking in with friends that I should have checked in with like a month ago, and I just haven't. So I think that's like a good exercise for people to do. But yeah, I mean, it's super sad. I mean, one thing this reminds me of, because you talked about how things you would think his mental state was fine, right? Because he's been so successful this year, including recently at the Wells Fargo. This reminds me of my favorite band of all time is Linkin Park. When Chester Bennington took his life, which I guess now is like 6.5 years ago, he had just recorded a carpool karaoke with, I can't remember the guy's name that does this.
Yeah, the late night host.
Right. And the rest of the band. And it was like that carpool karaoke that they recorded and put out ultimately was like 5 days removed from him taking his own life. And he couldn't, in that moment, it's a singular moment, but he couldn't have looked happier. He couldn't have looked more engaged and all of those things. And, when you're struggling, you get to that place, and sometimes, unfortunately, there's no looking back. It seems random to us, but perhaps to him, it was something that like he just couldn't handle.
Yeah. Condolences, obviously, to Grayson's family, to anyone who's dealing with these sort of tragedies in their own life. Um, I'm sorry. Like I hate that that happens. I will always be here if you ever need to DM or you need anyone to talk to.
Mhm.
This is sort of my outlet, and I use this for me, basically, Sia, to sort
Mhm.
of get these thoughts out of my head and express them. And when people reach back out, like Ted here and these other people in the chat, or people send me messages, it's very therapeutic for me to get some stuff off my chest. And what I feel like this is sort of a healthy way to deal with it, and easier for me because it's not sitting in front of a therapist. But I also feel like in turn, it's able to help others and have an understanding that we're sort of all in this together. And while we enjoy little things and we have these hobbies, life, family, these things are ultimately the most important parts. And he had so many things to live for that it's such a shame that I just wish he could have got the help he was looking for.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the course this week because we got a new one, or we're coming back to Hamilton. All right, some notes on the course preview. This section of the show is brought to you in part by my good friends over at the Fantasy Golf Pod. Check out my boy Chad Jish. They're still going each and every week. Good friends over there. Chad, one of the original founders of Preferred Lines, has always continued to support the show, so we appreciate them. Fantasy Golf Pod on Twitter and YouTube. Make sure to give them a follow. Okay, so I mentioned we're back to Hamilton Golf and Country Club, a short par 70, barely over 7,000 yards. Sia. Harry Cole design, last hosted in 2019, where, of course, Rory McIlroy dismantled the entire field on Sunday with a scorching 61, eerily similar and reminiscent of what we maybe saw in Quail Hollow, albeit a very different style golf course. Now, they did a pretty substantial renovation here since we last saw it. It's been modestly lengthened. It's not by any means a long golf course, of course, but there are 10 par fours under 450 yards, which is very short by PGA Tour standards. And part of the restoration was actually removing several clusters of trees. So a lot of people talk about this in golf course architecture. These original designs were relatively open and there wasn't many trees. And just over the years, they thought making it harder, they would continue to plant trees and they all grow up. They've removed a lot of those clusters. They've added some extra space on the greens as well. Last time they played this, where they were only around 4,000 square feet on average, now closer to 5,000. So adding 1,000 square feet of greens is certainly somewhat significant. Average fairway width at 250 yards is 29 yards wide, which is pretty standard. Now at 325, it's 27 yards wide. So I think, in my opinion, sort of how I'm attacking the course is I think distance is going to be a big factor, even though this
Yeah.
is a short course. And here's why I think it. If you can carry it 300, 310 yards, you can avoid a lot of the bunkers. You can cut a lot of the corners now because these trees have been removed. The fairway is 1 yard less wide on each side. So it's not like it narrows into a little chute like some of these courses do. There's still a little bit of room out there, and you're ultimately going to give yourself anywhere from a 75 to 150 yard shot. You're going to get a flip wedge. And if it's out of the rough, the greens are a little bit bigger this time around, which I think gives them a little bit more room coming out of the rough. So the way that I'm kind of approaching this is playing guys who can hit it far. And Rory was kind of the anomaly looking back. I know Furyk won here. Shane Lowry was on the leaderboard. So you can get it done with elite accuracy and continuing to play from the fairways. But I just think with some of the nuances and changes that have occurred to this course, these guys are going to just take driver and pound away.
Yeah, so it's going to be two approaches, right? No pun intended, where you're going to have that approach, the Rory approach, and then you're going to have like the Webb Simpson approach. And I'm remembering him from the 2019 leaderboard somewhere in the top 10. But so what's interesting, though, is when I started my research a couple of days ago, I was like, oh, okay, short plotters course. Like, let's look at what I looked at last week. That's going to apply. And for the record, that very well could apply because I am going to, in DFS and in the betting market, I am going to take some players who are accurate off the tee, a little shorter off the tee, and are going to come in with those irons from whatever it is, 175, 200, 150. But to your point, like there are those guys that can take the Rory approach, go long off the tee, and then now you're talking about a short wedge coming in, and that's going to be a much better approach to winning a tournament, in my opinion, than the other way. So I think there's room for both narratives, but certainly seems to me that if you can get a guy that's not going to get in too much trouble off the tee, because you tell me if you think I'm wrong here. I mean, I want length, and I don't mind if I'm going to get a little erratic here and there, but I don't want somebody who's just wildly inaccurate, because I do think that's going to be some trouble here. So that's why there's certain guys that bomb it off the tee that might look good in some models, but I might be Xing them out because of like severe accuracy issues.
Yes, I would 100% agree with you. I also will note that the normal when I did my research about 2 hours ago, the GCSAA fact sheet, which I refer to quite often in my research, which basically will tell you the rough length that the course plans to play, has not been released yet. So I'm going to continue to sort of monitor, because if the rough is super gnarly and players are talking about it and it's really difficult, then I think that brings in some of the plotters a little bit more, and it becomes a bit more accuracy emphasized off the tee. I don't envision that, but I will continue and willing to adjust my strategy should it be. The thing is, I'm mostly talking and referring to this show in an outright betting space. In fantasy, in DFS, if you're looking and playing cash lineups, or if you're looking to make top 20 bets, there is safe options that are going to be very accurate off the tee in terms of driving accuracy percentage. I just think the one that gets it right, if you're looking for an outright winner, is the bomber that has a pretty good week in terms of accuracy. Like Keith Mitchell, or if Sam Burns, or if Rory McIlroy, or if Adam Scott, hell, if even Gary Woodland, these guys that carry at 310, have a really dialed in week with the driver, they're much more likely to win than if Adam Svensson has a super accurate week, or Daniel Berger, or Doug Gim, or Aaron Rye has a week hitting 80% of fairways. If Keith Mitchell hits 60% of fairways, he's more likely to win, because he's going to have 100 yards in on 10 par fours, and the par fives are easy for them. They're 500 or 540 yards in 2 par fives. So they're both easily reachable. I just think that length could play a huge advantage unless some things shake out with the course or the weather. I know there was a ton of rain today that make it super gnarly playing out of the rough, and increases the demand for accuracy.
Can I ask you something about Keith Mitchell specifically? Because like another thing I want to do to like, and by the way, I bet on Keith Mitchell a decent, not last week. I didn't even have him in DFS, but I've been on him this year a little bit. But I do worry, like, to me, and I'm just going to compare to last week at the Charles Schwab Challenge at Colonial Country Club. Like, to me, around the green and scrambling are going to be a little bit more challenging this week than they were last week, which, even though Keith Mitchell, like, on a good day, on a good round, like, can avoid some of those issues, over 4, a guy like him scares me a little bit. There's a couple other guys I'm sure we'll go over that as this show goes that like kind of qualify there too. But is Keith Mitchell the kind of guy where you're willing to overlook that, or this week you're going to factor it in and be like, well, I like him, I just don't like him enough because of these around the green issues?
Yeah, around the green is the major concern with Keith Mitchell. I'm going to bring up the board now, kind of looking at the top, and we can sort of talk through some guys. But I bet Keith Mitchell. I bit the bullet this week on a 40-1. I know that he's down to 35 in some spots, but I have him as the number 2 player off the tee and the number 3 player on approach in the entire field over the last 36 rounds. So tee to green, he's been really good. And I realize that some of that has maybe tapered off a little bit. I mentioned earlier how Scottie Scheffler was 72 strokes better than the second best guy last week in the field of Colonial. It was actually Keith Mitchell from a strokes gain perspective. Top 10 in the field in terms of carry distance. You're right. The around the green concerns are 100% valid. He's 112th. He's not good. He cannot be missing greens, especially when they're this small. He is not very good out of the sand either. So he has to have a top tier week on approach, which he's shown the ability. I mean, he's 3rd in the field on strokes gained approach, and I just feel like that he can sort of take it over some of these corners. He's won on some shorter golf courses before, namely the Honda isn't that much longer than 7,000 yards down here. So I think that he has the ability to do it, and I like the upside on his price. Obviously, I know you're not there this week. Is there anyone at the top here? Like, let's name up the top 4 guys: Rory, Fleetwood, Theegala, Lowry. Those are your 4 favorites. If I made you take one, who are you most likely to click?
It's funny because I am going to click one of these guys, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. I haven't normally by now. I have like one guy click because I think his odds are going to move, but I didn't do that because I'm not really worried about that with these 2 in particular. We'll see. I got to decide in one of my outrights between Tommy Fleetwood, who was my initial gut play. And remember what I said about my research, where I was like, oh, this is my approach. And then I was like, maybe this isn't the right way. But like either way, I looked at weighted tee to green. I looked at his ball striking, his accuracy, of course. The approach play had some issues, however. Either way, I mean, the mid irons, okay, long irons have certainly been an issue. I just think this is one of those eye tests where I'm willing to potentially forego some stats that I don't like and be like, this is where Tommy Fleetwood should win. Okay. So I'm between him and Sia Nejad, who I think fits that other narrative where he can just kind of bomb it off the tee. We certainly know he can get hot with the putter, has some around the green issues. I don't think they're as pronounced as Keith Mitchell. So I'm not like super worried about it, but it certainly could get in the way. I'm between those 2. So I'm going to kick your question right back to you. If you had to choose between those 2, who would it be?
Fleetwood. It's interesting with Theegala because I don't think Keith Mitchell is a good around the green player or will ever be. I think Sahith has phenomenal hands. Like he pulls off some shots. He chips in often. Like he's really got it, but the numbers do not bear that out this year. And he had been really solid around the greens last year, but I have him 114th. Here's the reason with Fleetwood. I think that he checks every box. And you mentioned the approach play, which hasn't been good, but I think the majority of those tests have been far longer courses. When I have him 98th in approach this week, but when I go to 125 to 175 yards, he jumps to 19th. So a big leg up there with his wedges, maybe 9-iron, maybe even stretch it to an 8-iron type range for Tommy Fleetwood. Seems to see a big improvement. I'm still a bit scarred mentally and emotionally from what he did to me last year. Oh my God! At this event, I still can't believe it. He laid up. Yeah, he laid up. And then,
okay. Can I just say though, in his defense, like he's not expecting. In fact, I'm not even sure. You're not talking about the last playoff hole. You're talking about 18.
I'm talking about 18 when he needed a birdie to win. Yes.
Okay, fair enough. I was going to say because the playoff hole he lost. What was that? A 70-foot putt by Nick Taylor. Like.
Yeah,
that was
that. I mean, that's going to happen. 72-foot putt for eagle, but he should have never been there. It was, I think, the easiest hole on the course. And there's something about you have to play aggressively in moments. Like I'm a firm believer that what happened to Xander at Valhalla when he was standing in the bunker and had to hit that shot.
Yeah.
He played that extremely aggressively. Like he took on a ton of risk with that shot and nearly got it greenside. And I don't know if he does that in a lot of situations previously to that moment. And maybe that's why he hasn't come through. And he gave himself ultimately an easy up and down. But to win, you have to be brave. They've always said it in golf. And especially when you've got a circular grandstand behind the green that you can literally pound it off of with no penalty and get a drop. Just send a 3-wood up there. And he was hitting that little tailor-made burner so fantastic all week. So I worry about some of the clutchness things, but maybe Xander sort of buried some of those narratives. I would pick Fleetwood over Theegala this week to answer your question.
I think that's where I'm going to end up going. I'm not going to have a huge outright card, but especially since I'm taking somebody at 16, but I think he's going to be my first click ultimately.
All right. So a weird one that I have moving down this range. I don't know how I quite landed on it, but I took Sam Burns 28-1. I got sucked into some of the carry distance stats. I got sucked into my belief in win equity with 5 wins in the last 3 years, ignoring some of the recent form and struggles. But it's kind of been a tale of 2 seasons for Sam Burns. The first half of the season, he all of a sudden turned into like an uber consistent player. While he didn't get it done at the Amex, he was right there in Phoenix as well. He was consistently top 15, top 20. And all of a sudden, he's missed 3 of his last 5 cuts. So that has totally flipped. I think that he had a good week on approach at Valhalla. I'm looking at it now, plus 2.6, lost 5 strokes putting. I don't think that's likely to happen again with Sam Burns, who we know is a great putter. He does have that around the green strength that I think you may be looking for on these smallish greens. He's got the distance, he's got the win equity, and in an outright market, I think he's maybe a risky play for fantasy at $9,400 when there may be safer options. You know, if you go $100 more, you can get a much safer DFS play in Corey Connors here, who strikes it, you know, as his floor is probably 21st this week. But I love the upside of Sam Burns and maybe just taking a winner here at 28-1. Who are your thoughts in this mid-range? Can you get behind Burns?
It's so interesting. I understand it. First of all, I think I'm fading Corey Connors in DFS because I think he'll be popular, and I think I'm fading him in the outright market. And honestly, it's the short game. I just think he's going to have some problems. Whereas Sam Burns, maybe I'm not worried about that, but ever since the Waste Management, like Sam Burns has been so pedestrian, if not like kind of bad. I see your win equity argument though, because like in this field, and by the way, it was just, I think, what was it? The Wells Fargo where he actually had like a pretty good like Sam Burns-ish showing. Yeah, it's not bad. It's better than what it was like the month or two prior. I get the Sam Burns thing, and I think the number is fair. Looking at this board, I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm like mad at myself for saying this because I don't think this guy has a ton of win equity, but it's one of those Xander arguments. I'm not saying he's Xander, by the way, but it's one of those Xander arguments where it's like, oh my God, he checks every box. Like it's green everywhere. And of course I'm talking about Alex Noren. Like where's the fault in Alex Noren? Like where's the thing you're like, yeah, but ... Like, I don't know where it is. And what I'm seeing, what is that? 25-1, 22-1 in some places. I think this might be the tournament where Alex Noren finally cashes in.
So he's basically a top 25 machine. I think it's going back 8 straight events for Noren. He's playing the best he's probably ever played. Now, he had that run when he first jumped onto the PGA Tour where he sort of burst onto the scenes. I think he lost in a playoff at Torrey Pines, but he had won like 4 times on the DP World Tour right before that. Playing unbelievably. He does. He's awesome around the greens now that I look at it. I just wonder if you're paying for the stock at an all-time high on Noren. I thought when you had talked about may not have the win equity, I thought you were going to go Cameron Young, who you worried about like Zamber, because he can kind of be lumped into that. Probably the best player, probably the 2 best players who have yet to win a PGA Tour event, and Fleetwood and Cameron Young, both in this field with a great chance and both in the top 5 of the odds board. I don't know about Cam Young. I feel better about Noren than I do Connors. I would agree there. And there's been a consistency there. And I'm probably more likely to take him in DFS or continue to like pile on the top 20 market. I just love the outright space for bombers this week, which is why I went Burns and Mitchell.
Yeah. And by the way, the Cameron Young thing, like he's another guy I bet on earlier this year and it just didn't work out. I 100% believe in his talent, but because I might be, and I don't generally do this, but because I'm waiting around the green a little bit more than I normally do, it's just one of those where like, because we know how this works, right? It's almost like process of elimination sometimes. And I'm like, I got to figure out reasons to not take guys. Otherwise I'm taking the whole board. And that's why I'm not taking Cameron Young this week.
Yeah, totally. And it evolves too, right? Throughout the week. Like and that's what's one of the, I do the show on Monday every week, and I know you have early stuff as well. And sometimes I feel like I'm rushing into things and I'm using my first thought instead of the best thought always, which sometimes happens on Wednesday. So full card will be out Wednesday, but I can tell you that my 2 at the top I'm sort of locked into Burns and Mitchell, and I probably don't have room for another one. I do have some room down in the 40 to 50-1 range. You've got Aaron Rai, who's the number 1 driving accuracy guy in the field. Mackenzie Hughes, obviously sort of the Canadian narratives and looking for a win there. Also played well here in 2019. Batia, winner this season. Hadwin, the Canadian narratives. Davis Thompson been playing better. Van Rooyen, Pendrith, another Canadian who just won. Taylor, obviously coming back as defending champions. Svensson, the Canadians are coming out in this range. Sia, do you like any of them? Do you think they can repeat?
I don't think I like it. I like the Canadian. Well, I actually shouldn't say this, not in the outright market. Down the board, I've been playing this one Canadian a few times this year, but we'll get to him later. He's way down the board.
All right.
So, Taylor Pendrith is interesting to me because he does fit that narrative. that you're talking about, and that's probably like the smart narrative when it comes to this quote short course, which of course it is. I shouldn't air quote short course, but again, there's an implication that carries, and Taylor Pendrith kind of bucks that. With that said, he's one of those guys that like is kind of wild off the tee, is kind of inaccurate, and he's not, to me, he's not a good enough player yet, although he's really coming on. He's not a good enough player yet where I'm going to be like, all right, like it's like Sam Burns type win equity where he can dig himself out of it and go out and win a tournament. So I like him. I don't think I'm actually going to play him anywhere. But what I will say is some of the names you mentioned, I am going to go right back to Aaron Rai. It's kind of boring. I'll admit that he doesn't feel like he has a ton of win equity. Like it just doesn't feel like it's there for him, but he rates out really well. And what I'll say about him is that even last week, the ball striking, the tee to green, all of that, it was really good. He lost 4.58 strokes last week at the Charles Schwab. And the week before, he lost 2.22. That was at the PGA Championship. And you might say, well, okay, that means he's a bad putter, right? Like, so like, why are we even talking about him? Because I want a guy who can putt this week to some degree. The three tournaments prior to that, he gained with the putter. So I think he's one of those guys where I don't know what I'm getting with the putter, but I kind of do know what I'm getting with the tee to green. And so if I can get that spike putter with what I think I'm getting at this course with the tee to green, then maybe, because I played Aaron Rai last week, maybe he makes sense again this week.
Yeah, I like Aaron Rai. I he's the one that I definitely have been circling and sort of honing in on. Obviously played well really last year at the Canadian Open, albeit at a different course. But the driving accuracy, here's the thing, like I mentioned that I am kind of going with this narrative of bomb and gouge, I guess you could say. But if you're elite, like the difficulty is getting stuck in the middle, where you're not hyper accurate, but you also can't hit it 325 yards. Then you're in big trouble. But if you can consider, if you're the number one driving accuracy guy in the entire field, it is a huge advantage if you can play that. And if you're hitting it 285 off the tee, it's really not a big deal when you're only playing 420-yard holes. You've got a little flip 135 yards left. So certainly an option there with Aaron Rai that I have my eyes on. The only other click that I have this week is I did go with, one of my old stalwarts on my card, and it's Adam Svensson. Mm-hmm. I kind of came up with a self-rule that if a course was under 7,200 yards, I think Svensson is a good play. He's made 7 consecutive cuts. He actually played pretty well here in 2019. He missed the cut, but he lost like 6 strokes putting. Mm-hmm. But his approach numbers, are really coming around. Even at the PGA Championship, he gained over 5 on approach. It looks like 6 out of the last 7 big gainers. The putter has been cold, Sia, but it's always cold with Svensson. And just what I know from him is that it can flip. Like he's did it in multiple times. Even at the PGA Championship last year, he gained 7 strokes putting. When he won, he gained 9. He finished a high up at the John Deere where he gained almost 10 strokes putting. He has the ability to get really red hot with it. And when he's in a groove, he's such a nice little player on these short courses because he's really sort of elite with a wedge or a 9-iron in his hand. So he's the guy in sort of the long shot range for me.
All right, so 2 names I want to bring up here. First of all, I'm trying to find out a way to play 3 names, actually. Daniel Berger. I played him last week in the top 40 market, actually as a long shot outright too. He let me down in both because he had, just a terrible, I think it was the putting last week that really did him in, but the ball striking is kind of back with Daniel Berger. I wonder what you think of him, just really in any market. But the 2 names I really wanted to bring up, because you mentioned spike putting. EVR, I think, is interesting. By the way, he was pretty good here in 2019 when last time we played on this course, for those of you that are listening that didn't know that. 20th in 2019, the approach play has been solid, and we know that the putter can absolutely spike. But here's my real question. Is Davis Thompson good at golf? Because the last 3 tournaments would indicate that he is smashing at this golf thing. And I just wonder, is he like the sneaky guy that nobody's really going to be paying attention to that's chasing somebody on Sunday for an outright?
Yeah, I like him. I think that he's super dangerous, and I actually bet him on my card last week. I think at 110 to 1. Played really well, and nobody really watched it. But in Myrtle Beach that week, I think the same week of the Wells Fargo, I think he finished second in that event. So he's trending in a really nice direction, and definitely has the tools and the skill set of a player that you can see taking down a win, like a Davis Riley. Like, the guy has a phenomenal swing. He hits it long, he hits it far, and when he's sharp and when he's hot with his irons, he just continues to build self-confidence in that.
Right. And the short game has been relatively neutral lately, which frankly isn't a super bad thing considering how well he's hitting it.
In Berger, you mentioned Berger. I'm immediately eyes drawn to Berger. 13, 36, 45th are his last 3 starts. He's been really solid with the ball striking, like you mentioned. Vast improvements there. I've noticed from watching him, and he won't rate out real well in the driving distance category, because if you look back long term, it was never something he's known for. He's got a little pop in the bat right now. He's over average in terms of ball speed. He's averaging 297. And when you look sort of at like his short term, which you can't really go back too far with Daniel Berger, but even I'm looking at the last 18 rounds, averaging 299 off the tee, and he's hitting 70% of fairways. He's hitting 10% more fairways than the average PGA Tour player, and he's always been really good from like 100 to 175 yards. And we know he's got guts. Like, I think that he wants it. I think that he's motivated. There's a ton of players in this field, and that's hard to really handicap, but it's definitely something I think that you can look forward to when you see like an 80-1 on like a nice redemption story in its own, as we spoke about, and these guys that had previously been to the top of the mountain who are hungry to get back. Yeah,
I think Daniel Berger is close to not necessarily winning a tournament, but maybe consistently like being inside the top 30. And that's a decent comeback story for now for Daniel Berger.
Absolutely. You mentioned you got another long shot before we get out of here?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Canadians, and I just
who's your guy?
I had a first round leader on I had 5 first round leaders, but one of them was like a little unrealistic, and it was this one. Last week it was Ben Silverman at 125-1. He had a good 4 rounds. Forget about first round leaders. First round was average, but listen, I'm not taking him as an outright. I just think he's an interesting piece. He's doing most of it with the putter, so not a lot to lean on there. But if we're talking out like long shots, I mean, I kind of like CT Pan. I played him a lot last week. Henrik Norlander, if he has the right tee time, I'm probably playing him as a long shot first round leader. Kelly Craft has been very interesting ever since the Zurich Classic. He's been pretty solid. And I'll mention one other guy that's probably going to be popular, because I think on DraftKings he might be 6,500. I played him last week as well in DraftKings, not in the T40 market or anything. Mac Meisner has been very good. Off the tee, he hasn't been that good. So
did he finish top 5?
Yeah, I think he finished 5th.
Yeah,
it was either 5th or 6th. Something extraordinary. And it's not just that tournament. Like, his finishing positions as of late have been good. His short game's been good, and the ball striking's been really good in 3 of his last 4. So somebody to consider.
That's awesome, man. What else you got planned for the rest of this week, content-wise, around the Canadian Open?
Yeah, around the Canadian Open. So I may or may not be joining the boys on Win Daily Sports for, like, they do the PGA Draftcast. Joe, as you know, you'd be we haven't had that many guests, or they haven't had that many guests this year. You'd be a great guest on that show if you have the time for it. I'll let those guys know. You know, of course, your boy Spencer Tee Off Sports is on there every single time with David and Joel Schreck, David Bileski and Joel Schreck. I do I'm going to be doing some content for CBS Sports HQ at kind of like random times over the next couple of days. I do some content on By the Book on golf, usually on Wednesdays. We go over our golf picks. Other than that, I'm trying to think. I must be forgetting something. I know I have like dedicated shows every week, but I'm not on the First Cut anymore because my TV show in DC conflicts with that. But
what's your TV show in DC? Can we know about that?
I forgot about my main show, by the way. The Early Wedge, of course. It's on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock. That's with me, Patrick McDonald from CBS, of course, and Eric Cohen from CBS as well. That's like my main sort of like picks show or what have you, every Tuesday at 7. But the TV show is a sports betting show, Monday through Friday. It's a regional show, so only like DC, Virginia, Maryland people get it. It's on Monumental Sports Network, which is the same network that the Washington Capitals play on, the Washington Wizards, the Washington Mystics. It's pretty cool. We got a brand new, like, crazy cool studio. I do it with a girl named Meg McDonald, who's very talented. So that's a fun show. I do it we do it live every Monday through Friday at 5:30.
That's the dream, man. I'm hoping to get there one day. So it's awesome to see sort of your journey. I appreciate your words and the thought that you put into the majority of your content, and how your sort of willingness to talk about things outside of the world of sports that are meaningful to a people. And a lot of people obviously you brought over to this show, which I'm appreciative of, who checked out the show tonight. I saw in the chat there. So it was great to see you guys. I wish you all the best, Sia. I thank you for making time for me tonight. I know I kept you an hour, probably longer than you thought you were going to be here, but I really
talk a
enjoyed
lot,
the
Joe.
conversation.
Joe, I talk a lot. That was me. That wasn't you. I'm absolutely happy to be here. I know the guys in the chat that came over that are fans of me are already fans of you, and I know they'll be back in this chat too, because they're good dudes. They enjoy good golf content, good content in general, and that's exactly what you give.
Thanks, man. We'll talk soon. Keep me
All right,
updated.
sounds good. Thanks, Joe.
See you, buddy. All right, guys. It was really cool to have him on. I've been wanting to talk to him for a while. I wanted to sort of take a few moments before we get out of here to expand on a little bit of what we talked about with Grayson. So those of you guys who are new here, I like to take the last 5 minutes of the show. I call it a final thought segment. I go through stuff that maybe doesn't pertain to golf betting whatsoever. And last week, I talked a lot about Xander, and I kind of wanted to tie that in to this week. So I ended last week's show with a quote from Xander Schauffele. And this part of it was mine, and I felt like the mind and the pressure and the goals and the expectations that were on Xander Schauffele can obviously cause a heavy burden, and can be a heavy burden for any individual. And here's what Xander said: I just felt like I've done enough work. I'm good enough to do it. I just needed to shut my mind up and actually do it. Shut your mind up and actually do it was the quote that I sort of took from that. And to actually do it, as great as it feels for someone like Xander Schauffele, is forever fleeting and uncapturable. You did it, Xander. You conquered your nerves, you calmed the anxiety, you warded off all the demons, and you prevailed. But what happens is you got to do it again. You got to wake up and do it again. You got to do it again in 2 weeks at Pinehurst. You've got to do it and defend your Olympic gold medal. You've got to continue to do it. And every day is not necessarily a struggle, but another opportunity that you have to go out there and win that day again. And while it can be assuring for him now to know that it's not impossible to do these things, doesn't make it any less hard. And I can't stop thinking about this with Grayson Murray. And like I talked about him being in the midst of the best professional career of his life and achieving success that he had doubts that he could ever have. He spoke after that win in Sony. And I talked to Andy about this. And he mentioned during that interview on the course that he had considerations about quitting golf. And he said this. He said, quitting life. And that struck me. And to see him have that career defining win, and he said it was a great for his career, but it did not make or break his life, his faith, his sobriety, his family. Those are the things that he wanted to ultimately be judged on. He went on a podcast soon after and talked about what inspired him to finally get sober. And it's a guy who had been only dealing with it for a little over a year, since the Mexico Open, I believe, last year, where there was an incident. But he talked about, the addiction and going through that, and how what really turned things around for him was he lost his father, lost a best friend to alcoholism. And he feared that his parents knew his struggles and them getting that dreaded phone call one day about him. And that's what ultimately happened. And it's sad. And so many people are going through some form of anxiety, depression, addiction, hardships that we don't see on the exterior. I'm one of them. You're probably one of them too. And I'm reminded that whatever wins you have and whatever moments of pure joy and happiness are fleeting, just like with Xander Schauffele, they're only promised today. And like Sia talked about, life is incredibly fragile. Every man, woman, and child are vulnerable to one single moment. And I'll tie this in a little bit to Memorial Day. And my brother, who's probably checking out this show's best friend and someone who we grew up with and was very close to our family, incredible athlete, signed up for the Marine Corps. could have gone and likely gotten a college scholarship to a number of different places and continued his athletic career, but an impenetrable human being, all-time leading scorer in hockey at our high school. Jersey retired in both lacrosse and football at Theodore Roosevelt High School. He was instantly and unquestionably the leader in every room that he stepped into, and that leadership in the Marine Corps means that you are first in. Adam was always the first in, and he would fight for anybody that he cared for and believed in. And the only problem is the person that he ended up fighting was an IED in Afghanistan. First in the building, first one in, gone at 22. My point being that everyone is fragile to a particular moment that can affect the rest of their lives, and in so many different ways, whether it's mentally, whether it's dealing with a disease that is after you. These type of things are repulsively patient, and they'll sit there and wait. And you can be good if you're dealing with depression. You can be good for a day, you can be good for a week, you can be good for a year, but it will stay there and it will linger and it will wait for a moment of weakness or a moment of fragility. And that's what we're all can ultimately succumb to. Have compassion for those moments and for other people, and try to live with an understanding that winning is forever fleeting, and that chase never ends until one day it does. And the race for all of us can have a million different variables and circumstances about it, but for every person that walks this planet, the outcome is the same, and it all ends the same. So take care of the people around you. Check in on those of you who have family members or friends that are struggling, and try to live each day with an understanding that anything beyond it is never promised. Thank you guys for checking out the show this week. It truly means a lot to me. Give it a like, maybe give it a subscribe on the way out. Continue to try to grow this platform. We are about much more than golf. It's been a sad week in professional golf, but I wish you all the absolute best of luck betting the Canadian Open. I will catch you here next week. I think Memorial's on tap next. This has been the Preferred Lines Podcast. My name is Joe Idoni. It was an absolute pleasure to host Sia Nejad and be on camera for you for the last hour talking professional golf. I hope you have a great week. I'm out of here. Peace.